Hello, and this is another video for our required reading for the semester. And the recent text that we read is called What is Happiness, written by the poet John Ciardi. And the paper you're going to be writing is a response to that essay. And the paper is going to be what's called a rhetorical analysis. I think I sent a note out to the class, so I won't spend too much time with this, but rhetoric, I like the definition of rhetoric being the art of communication. And then analysis is the art of balancing the whole thing with the parts of a thing, right? We can, um, we need to have an understanding of the whole work, but we also have to look closely at individual parts to see how they work. And then we all must also take those individual parts and see how they work together for the total thing, right? You will see errors in analysis sometimes when someone takes a statement or quote, a verse from scripture and interprets it, and they've interpreted it out of context. They don't understand how it fits in with the other pieces. They don't know who has said it. They don't know what's happened prior to. They don't know what's happened afterwards. So good analysis, first of all, you need to have read the entire essay, probably read it a couple times, and then we tighten the focus of our lens and look at specific things. But then we also got to zoom back out and see how the whole thing works. All right. And your paper, as a response to this, you're doing two things. You need to be able to say, here's what John Ciardi says, and then here's how he does that. And if you want to bring in the rhetorical ideas of ethos and pathos and logos, you may do that. If you want to look at the examples of the different rhetorical modes that he uses, such as definition, comparison, contrast, illustration. You may do those as well. And there's several other things that you can look at. We'll talk about now. All right. So in an essay that asks the question, what is happiness? The writer has obligated himself to tell us what he thinks happiness is. And he's also obligated himself to give us a reasonable statement on what happiness is. And he comes out of the gate and says, for Americans, the right to pursue happiness is issued to us with our birth certificates. First thing John Ciardi does is he makes an allusion. An allusion is a reference to, without being specific, some text outside of itself. So the text we're reading is What is Happiness? The text John Ciardi is alluding or hinting to is the Declaration of Independence, right? Which says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But then from there, John Ciardi says, even though we've been issued the right to pursue happiness, we don't know where it is. And then he takes it a step further. It might be we've been issued a hunting license and there is no game. There's nothing to hunt. So happiness is at our birth. The right to pursue happiness is at our birth. We're having a hard time finding where it is. It might be that it doesn't even exist. And he follows up that claim about happiness might not even exist by quoting Jonathan Swift. And I'll stop here and jump ahead to our final paper for the semester. When you gather sources to make an argument, it's important that you put together credible sources that you agree with and credible sources that you don't agree with. Jonathan Swift, it might require a little more looking into him to see that he is a credible source, does not agree with John Ciardi. Jonathan Swift says happiness doesn't exist. If you think that it does, you are a fool among knaves. You are a stupid, poor person. And then John Ciardi comes right and says, but Americans don't think in terms of fools and knaves. We think that happiness can be bought. And then after he makes that claim, he moves on and explains, amplifies, illustrates that claim. He says, look, in the American idea of buying happiness, we have this branch of commercialism called the advertising arm, and it keeps before us constantly the things that we should want And then he follows it up with, here's just two examples. Here's the automobile industry, and here's the beauty industry. And this is usually when I ask students, where are we today still advertised to constantly, probably more than even in John Ciardi's day, to buy the latest version of a thing, right? Because it's going to help us in some utilitarian way and will help us in some esoteric way, right? The time that John Ciardi is writing this, automobile commercials or advertising were geared primarily towards men. This is not because John Ciardi is misogynistic or dislikes women. That's the work environment was very different. Who was spending the money or who was making the money to be spent was a little bit different than today. And we can see today how car commercials will have women in it very often. In fact, when the Marvel studios were making their films every other day, and Captain Marvel came out, the actress of Captain Marvel had her own contract. She was selling automobiles. You would see her driving the car, right? And then the beauty industry, John Ciardi goes in and explains what's happening there. And of course, today, I think the beauty industry is still going strong, marketing to women, but there's also a lot of focus towards the male market as well. And usually, what I tell students about this is when the actor Chris Pratt was becoming more well known for his role in Community, he was an out of shape bum, right? Funny bum in the show. And uh, when I was still on social media, I remember him posting a picture of himself in the gym, and the caption beneath his photo said something like this: how do you motivate yourself to get in shape? You sign a six-figure contract. And the contract he was referring to was for his lead role in the Marvel studio films Guardians of the Galaxy. And there was a great, in order for him to play that part, he had to look a certain way, and motivated by job security and, of course, the jobs of other people. He changed his body to a great deal. And there's a lot more that we could say about that. Anyways, so John Ciardi, one of the things we see is not only making an allusion to an outside text, not only dropping a credible source in Jonathan Swift, he will drop other credible sources along the way, like Bernard DeVoto, Yeats the poet, and Robert Frost the poet. But then he will also support his claims. He doesn't just make a claim, he makes a claim and then he follows it up with an explanation or a support so that we can better understand or see what it is he's saying. Then he goes on to say that happiness is very difficult to define. I don't think that the buying our way to happiness works. That's what John Ciardi says. He says, but the best way to define happiness is to set up two extremes. On the one hand, we have the materialistic extreme. You can buy your happiness. This is the Western idea of happiness, the American idea of happiness. And then on the other extreme, the Eastern side, you have the holy man from India, the spiritual side, right? And this is the side that, and John Ciardi goes on to explain that this side cares about no material things whatsoever. And Ciardi will say, I don't think that that's how you find happiness either. Then he will move on and say, since the way to define happiness is to set up two extremes, then you must move towards the middle and find, to quote Aristotle, a golden mean. Well, how do you find happiness? And Ciardi is going to make the argument that it's about bringing together both the material and the spiritual. He says this is done in Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, an American philosopher, an American transcendentalist. And Ciardi will go on to explain that Thoreau cared about things on the low end, the material things, but only as they would help him obtain the high things, the spiritual things. From there, John Ciardi will finally provide his definition of what he thinks happiness is. And he uses a technique in his writing called anadiplosis. It's a Greek term. You see it in the very first piece you read called Not Vanity, because I learned this technique after studying what is happiness, and I wanted to employ it in writing Not Vanity. He gets down to the end and he mentions the word effort at the end of a paragraph, and then effort is the first word of the next paragraph. When you see the repetition of a specific word or a phrase or even an idea, this is in a technique called anadiplosis, which is a Greek word meaning a doubling or a redoubling of a thing. It visually lets the writer see that one paragraph is connected to the next, but then it also helps move from one idea to the next by seeing that this, now I'm going to amplify this idea of effort. And this is where John Ciardi will say, happiness is how much effort we put in life-engaging difficulties. And he will follow this up with an illustration of games. We like our games to be difficult. There are rules that need to be followed, and it's about playing well and winning by using those rules. And then he'll back out and say, it is my belief that the happiness market, the idea that happiness can be bought, it purports that there is no effort to being happy. And then he will say, it seems as if that's what the extreme spiritual side is saying, right? There's no effort needed to be happy. In fact, he'll go on to say, it seems as if the holy man of India isn't even playing the game. And this, a good way of thinking about it, we've probably have all seen this before. Maybe we've been guilty of it ourselves. We don't really try, and then we lose, but then we can fall back on, I didn't really try because I don't really care. And the truth of the matter is, it's hard to care and try and still lose. And so Ciardi is postulating that maybe it's a type of defense mechanism. The other thing I want to bring out is that Ciardi uses from time to time in this text the words perhaps and maybe. If you go to type an email in your school email, you will probably, if you use the word perhaps, more than likely it's going to be red flagged. And you'll get a note that says words like perhaps and maybe show a lack of confidence. You can take that idea and you can just punt it away from you as far as you want, right? Certainly we need to have confidence and exude confidence, but because we are humans and we are fallible and we are capable of mistakes, we need to be able to make room for that in our arguments. And Ciardi does this. He says, look, maybe because I'm such a Western person, I have a hard time buying into that extreme Eastern spiritualistic idea of happiness. And the word perhaps there is John Ciardi's way of saying, maybe I don't really understand what's going on. Nevertheless, he still will make his claim. So we still want to use words like perhaps and maybe. We want to use them sparingly. Using them too much will start to depreciate our confidence in the eyes of our audience and our readers. But using it well, using it artfully, actually can build up our ethos, our credibility, right? So there's that balance of confidence and that balance of humility. So Ciardi will go on to say that I don't think happiness is found in the materialistic extreme. I don't think it's found in the spiritualistic extreme. I think it's found in this balance of both. I think Thoreau is an example of that. And then he will go back and tie into his opening allusion by mentioning the founding fathers and, of course, the signers of the Declaration. And then Ciardi will close the piece by saying, look, if you want to pursue happiness through the materialistic, go for it. If you want to pursue it in the spiritualistic extreme, go for it. I think you will end up ultimately unhappy, but you get to make the choice which way you want to go. So one of the things you can do is, as you provide a rhetorical analysis of this piece, is go back and track the piece and see how Ciardi ties everything. This whole essay works like a mathematical equation. This leads to this, then we add this, we multiply this, and this is our end result. There's a very much a logical flow with this essay. So your paper, again, response needs to be, here's me being able to say what John Ciardi has said. Don't put words in his mouth, right? And then follow it up with, here's how he goes about this. These are the different techniques or the different tactics that he uses. If you want to weigh in with whether or not you agree with Ciardi, you have some room to do that, but that's not the main goal of this paper. All right? Thank you very much.